האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dobro V'Yetcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Masei because we have a double parsha this week. The two parshios that we're going to read, God willing, this Shabbos are Matos and Masei. And we're looking at in Parshas Masei, section Gimel, Os Gimel, section 3. We're going to take a look at some psukim, not from the parsha, but from the Haftorah. And those are that's going to be Sefer Yirmiyahu, Perek Beis, plus Psukim Dalet and Hey. And then we're going to backtrack a little bit and look at a few psukim in Sefer Yeshaya, Perek Nun Dalet, Psukim Vav through Tes. And the Zera Shimshon is going to put together for us, connect all the dots. Why are we looking at these psukim and these different places and how they fit together? So let's start again with two psukim from the Haftorah, Yirmiyahu, Perek Beis, Psukim Dalet and Hey. Shimu devar Hashem Beis Yaakov. Hearken to the word of Hashem, house of Yaakov. V'chol mishpachos Beis Yisrael, and all of the families of the house of Israel. Ko amar Hashem, so says Hashem. Ma motzu avoseichem. What did your forefathers find? Be ovel, in me that was bad. Ki rochaku me'olai, that they distanced themselves from me. Vayelchu acharei hahevel, and they went after futility. Vayebolu, and they became foolish. So in these two psukim from the Haftorah, again from Sefer Yirmiyahu, Hashem says, what did I do wrong? Basically, what did I do wrong that the Jewish people distanced themselves from me and followed after foolishness, which usually is a reference to idolatry, to things that have no value and no worth. Now let's take a look at the psukim from Sefer Yeshayahu, Yeshaya Perek Nun Dalet, psukim Vav through Tes, and let's look at those psukim. Ki cheisha azuva ve'atzuvas ruach kira'ach Hashem. Hashem has called you, meaning the Jewish people, has said that you are similar to a forsaken woman and a woman who is depressed, who is downtrodden. Ve'eshis neurim ki simoes Amar Elokayich. And like a woman who was a young wife, and now she has become despised, says Hashem. So in this pasuk, the Jewish people are referred to as a forsaken woman and a downtrodden woman, and a wife that has become despised. But next pasuk, berega katon azavtich. For in one moment I forsook you. Uverachamim gedolim akabtzech, and with great mercy I have taken you back. Beshetzef ketzef histarti ponai rega mimech. For a brief moment of wrath I hid my face from you momentarily. Uvechesed olam richamtich, and with eternal kindness I have taken compassion on you. Amar goalech Hashem, says your Redeemer Hashem. And one more pasuk, ki me Noach zos li, because like the waters of Noach, this is to me. Asher nishbati me'ever me Noach od al haaretz. Just like I swore I would not again bring the flood of Noach on the world. Kain nishbati, so too I have sworn, mikitzof alayich umigar boch, from becoming angry with you and rebuking you implying for a long period of time. Hashem is saying, I might briefly, momentarily become angry and express anger with you, but I have sworn off becoming angry and punishing you and rebuking you for long periods of time, just like I swore that I would not bring the waters of Noah back. So the Zera Shimshon, as we mentioned, is going to talk about these psukim and show how they connect and put them all together for us. Let's get right into the piece, Os Gimel, Parshas Masei. Ma motzu avoseichem bi'ovel. What did I do wrong that your forefathers found in me, ki rochaku me'olai, that they distanced themselves from me? V'chule. Koshe, this is difficult. Ech sal kedatach lomar. How could the pasuk, the Navi, ever even think to say, Shebe HaKodesh Baruch Hu Yesh Ovel, that there could conceivably be something wrong and mistaken in Hashem, Chas v'Sholem, God forbid. So the Zera Shimshon's question is that in the pasuk, Hashem uses a language. The Navi quotes Hashem as using a language of what did your forefathers find wrong about my actions, about me? And so the Zera Shimshon says that's a very unusual and almost inappropriate expression, because what could they have found, God forbid, that would actually be wrong and inappropriate about Hashem? Next paragraph, V'yesh lomar, and we can say, the matzinu b'Shulchan Aruch Yoredeya, we find in the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, in the section called Yoredeya, Siman Reish Lamed Vav Siv Vav, chapter 236, paragraph 6, we find the following: Shnayim shenishba'u la'asos davar echad. Two people who take an oath to do one thing, meaning two people come together and they swear they're going to do something in a partnership. They're making an agreement between each other, and they're both swearing that they're going to do it. Ve'ovar echad mehem al hashvua. One of the two people violates the oath. One of the two people doesn't do what he or she swore to do. Hasheni potter. The second person is exempt from having to follow the oath that he or she took. Ve'eno tzarich haTorah. And he doesn't need to have his vow annulled. HaTorah here is as in the expression hataras nedorim, where we nullify vows. So he or she doesn't even need to do that, because the whole arrangement was broken when the first person violated the oath. Lefichach, therefore, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, continues. Ish ve'isha shenishtadchu ze lozeh. A man and a woman who became engaged to each other. V'kiblu cherem linose lizman kavua. And they took upon themselves an oath to marry at a specific time. Misha ovar ve'he'evir hamoed. The one who breaks this commitment and lets the appointed time pass without showing up to the wedding, without becoming married, osur linose la'acher, is forbidden to marry another person. If the person took an oath and broke off the engagement, took an oath to marry and broke the engagement, the Shulchan Aruch says they're forbidden to marry another person. V'halo mutter, and the other individual who did not break the oath, the person who was left standing at the altar, so to speak, to use an expression, but it means the other person who was ready to get married and didn't do anything wrong, is permissible to marry someone else. Ve'eno tzarech haTorah, and doesn't need to nullify his or her vow. So at that point, the oath breaker, the engagement breaker, cannot remarry, but the engagement keeper, the vow keeper, can marry someone else, but the first person who broke it can't marry someone else temporarily, as we'll see. V'gam ha'ma'akev atzmo, and even the person who prevented the wedding from happening, be it the man or the woman, mutter la'acher shenisa kenegdo. It's permissible for that person to marry someone else after the other person marries. So let's pause for a second. You have a couple, let's take nice Jewish names, Bob and Barbara. Bob and Barbara become engaged, and they not only are engaged in a kind of informal way, they actually take a vow. They take oath. They each take an oath to marry by a specific date. And Barbara shows up in a beautiful dress, and Bob doesn't show up. He breaks his vow. He breaks the commitment to marry. So now Bob is temporarily told by the halacha, you cannot marry anyone else. Barbara is told, you kept your promise, you're here, you were there ready to get married. If you choose to wait for Bob, you can do that. But if you choose to marry someone else, you can do that. Once Barbara marries someone else, then Bob is freed up to also go and marry someone else. He's not bound by the commitment any longer because that once Barbara or either one of the parties marry someone else, then the entire original arrangement is considered nullified without anyone having to actually do hataras nedarim. Umikol makom, back in the text. And nevertheless, zeh shekenegdo, this person who is the other individual, imrotze liftor atzmo mishvuaso, if he wants to go and free himself from his oath, or him or her, yelech etzel chacham v'yatir lo, he should go to a chacham, to a halachic authority, and have his vow or her vow nullified. Because perhaps the one who prevented the marriage from happening and held everything up, yavi edim shehayu be'ones, he might bring witnesses that he was prevented by some emergency, by conditions or developments outside of his or her control. The nimsazeshe kenegdo, and then the other person over al shvuaso, it would be considered as if he or she were violating his or her oath. Ad kan lishono, until here is a quote from Shulchan Aruch. All of this was a quote from the Code of Jewish Law, v'ayin od l'kamen b'parshas Vayelech, and you can see more about this later in Parshas Vayelech. Let's pause to make sure we understand that last part, which is vital for us to be able to understand what the Zera Shimshon is going to explain moving forward. So let's go back to Bob and Barbara. They got engaged. They made a commitment to get married, and they took oaths that they were going to marry by a certain date. And then Barbara showed up ready to marry Bob. Bob didn't show up. So we said that as a first step, Barbara can marry someone else, but Bob can't marry anyone else until Barbara, in fact, marries someone else. Then the Shulchan Aruch says, however, in this case, Barbara should really, ideally, go and get her vow to marry Bob nullified before she marries someone else, because of the following possibility. If Barbara just goes without nullifying her original vow to marry Bob and goes and marries a different person, let's say Jim, and now Bob shows up and has witnesses to prove, let's say, that he had fallen seriously ill and wasn't able to communicate, wasn't able to show up, and that's why he didn't come. Well, he is blameless in such a situation. He didn't do anything wrong. He was prevented through an one, something that he could not, through events outside of his control. And therefore, he now is the one who is told by the halachic authorities, well, Bob, you didn't do anything wrong, but Barbara, you jumped the gun a little bit and you went and you married Jim because you assumed Bob had broken his commitment. It turns out Bob did not break his commitment because of these unforeseeable and unforeseen and unpreventable circumstances. And so the halacha, the Shulchan Aruch says, whoever wants to marry first, even if it's the person who did nothing wrong, should do hatarat nidorim, or in this case, the shavua, the oath. They should have it nullified by an appropriate halachic authority, and then they're certainly free to marry. Keep all that in mind as we move forward. Next paragraph. V'chvar Yisrael nishba'u leHakadosh Baruch Hu. And the Jewish people had sworn to Hashem, lekayem mitzvosov, to fulfill his mitzvos, v'shelo la'avod avodah zora, and not to worship idols. Ve'af HaKadosh Baruch Hu nishba lohem. And so too, Hashem had taken an oath to the Jewish people, shelo yachalifem be'uma acheres, never to switch them for a different nation, v'lo yaniach es Yisrael la'olam, and never to forsake the Jewish people. And you can see that's based on a Gemara in Maseches Gittin, based on psukim in the Torah. So the Jewish people in HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Hashem are bound to each other by mutual oaths. Hashem has sworn to never forsake the Jewish people and never replace them with another nation. And the Jewish people have sworn to follow Hashem's commandments and not to worship idols, which is like trying to replace Hashem, chas v'shalom, with something else. Top of the next column on the left. V'zohi kavonas hakosuv. And this is the intention of the pasuk, meaning the psukim we first looked at in Sefer Yirmiyahu, Sefer that were brought in the first paragraph. Bishloma im kishenisrachatem mimenu ve'avartem al hashvua. It would have been understood if, when the Jewish people originally distanced themselves from Hashem and they transgressed their oath to be totally faithful to Hashem, to totally follow his mitzvos and not to worship idols, if when they had broken that, if Hashem had turned around and distanced himself from them, k'moshe hadin nosein, as the law would have allowed, Shahala mutter, ve'eno tzarach hatara. The other person, when one person breaks the vow to get married, the other person is permitted to go marry someone else without even needing technically to get his or her vow annulled. Then it would have been permissible for the Jewish people to distance themselves from Hashem, meaning to continue to not follow Hashem's mitzvos and even worship idols, God forbid. Shaharei af hama'akev atzmo, because even the person who prevents the wedding from happening, to go back to the Shulchan Aruch's example, muter la'acher sheniso zeh shekenegdo. It's permitted for that person to marry someone else once the original prospective spouse marries someone else, then the first person who delayed the wedding and didn't keep his or her oath, that person can also remarry. But now that Hashem fulfilled his oath, ki de'isa b'medrash, as it states in the Medrash of Devarim Rabbah, Kol mashe nishbati lavosechem lo kiyamtiha. Everything, Hashem is quoted as saying, everything that I swore to your forefathers, have I not fulfilled it? Nishbati lahem sha'ani mevarech b'neihem. I promised, I swore to them that I would bless their children, and I've done it. Sha'ani motzi eschem beruchush gadol. I promised that I would take the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim with great wealth, and I did that. Lo kiyamti, did I not fulfill all of my promises? Mamotzu avosechem bi'ovel kirochaku me'olai. That's what is meant in the pasuk. What problem does your forefathers see in me that they distance themselves from me? So let's understand the whole paragraph. To do that, we need to go back to refresh our memory about the Zera Shimshon's original question, which was, what did the pasuk mean when Hashem says, what mistake, what problem, what sin even did the Jewish people find in me? And Zera Shimshon's question was, how could we even use that language? Of course, it's inconceivable that there would be, Hashem would, so to speak, commit a sin or a transgression or do something wrong. So now Zera Shimshon has answered and explained it. What Hashem was saying was, when the Jewish people took an oath to me and I took an oath to them, and they started to violate the oath, and they started to do averos and not keep all of my mitzvos, and even perhaps dabble in avodah zarah, when they did that, I didn't respond as I would have been allowed to by saying, you broke your oath to me, and now I'm allowed to break my oath to you. I did not do that. That would have been a problem for the Jewish people that they could have pointed to, even though technically I would have been allowed to, I would have been released from my oath to them because they broke their oath to me. Hashem says, but I did not do that. I kept my promise. I kept my oath to them. So, ma motzu avosechem biovel. So what possible complaint can the Jewish people have that even after they sinned, they continued to distance themselves from me, and they acted as if I had abrogated our arrangement, but I never did. I kept my promises. Continuing in the next paragraph, V'zehu she'omar hakosub. Now the Zera Shimshon switches over to the psukim in Sefer Yeshayahu. That's not from our Haftorah, but we'll see why he brings them in now. And that what's those psukim state, Che'isha azuva va'atzuvas ruach keruach Hashem, like a forsaken and downtrodden woman Hashem has referred to you. Mahu loshan azuva va'atzuvas ruach. What exactly is the meaning of a forsaken and downtrodden woman? Why? What does it mean Hashem referred to the Jewish people in that way? Ela lefisha min hadin. But what it means is, according to the law, again, going back to this section in Shulchan Aruch and the Code of Jewish Law that the Zera Shimshon brought in, according to the law stated there, ish va'isha shenishba'u zeh zeh, a man and a woman who took an oath to each other to get married, misha ikav, the one who holds things up and prevents the wedding from happening, osir li nosei la'acher, is forbidden, at least temporarily, from marrying anyone else. Aval shekenegdo mutar afilu below hatara, but the other person who did not break the vow, his or her vow, is permitted to marry someone else even without annulling his or her oath. V'im kain, and if so, ha'ish, the man in this analogy, Zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is a reference to Hashem, V'ha'isha, and the woman in the analogy, Haim Yisrael, that's a reference to the Jewish people, V'Yisrael Ikvu, and it was the Jewish people who prevented the wedding from happening, or who caused the problem, Shesaru me'acharei Hashem, because they turned away from the path of Hashem, V'lo holchu b'derachav, and they didn't completely follow his ways. Vehem ha'asurim li nosei la'acher, and they therefore are forbidden to marry someone else, just like Bob. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu mutar sheyachalifim. But Hashem, it is permissible, it would have been permissible for Hashem, God forbid, to switch out the Jewish people and bring in another nation, just like the woman, Barbara, in our analogy, could marry someone else. V'zehu she'amar kicha isha azuva. That's what the pasuk meant when it said the Jewish people were like a forsaken woman. Top of the next page on the right. She'a'ish shekishira shehi ikva, because the man who stayed committed to the wedding date, when he sees that the woman is not there and she's holding up the wedding, preventing the wedding from happening, he stops thinking. He nicha v'lo nasa od panav v'libo eleha. He leaves her temporarily, and he's not thinking about her anymore. She's not in his thoughts because he was planning to have a wedding, and she didn't show up. So he's like, well, I guess I got to consider my options because she didn't show up. Azuva. And so the pasuk says that the Jewish people were like a forsaken woman, a woman who the husband said, I am not planning to marry you right now because you didn't show up. V'odhi atzuvas ruach. And she's also downtrodden. She'ena yechola linaseh la'acher, because she can marry someone else. She'adayin hi b'shvua. She is still bound by her oath. She'afal pi shechota Yisraelhu, because we have a very important fundamental rule, which is even if a Jewish person sins, they are still considered Jewish. They don't lose their Jewish identity, and they're still obligated in the mitzvos, even if they've committed if they've violated the Torah and committed serious transgressions, they're still considered to be part of the Jewish people and the Jewish nation and obligated in the mitzvahs. You can see that's from the Gemara in Masechah Sanhedrin. So that's what Zera Shimshon says. That's what this phrase means when it says the Jewish people were like an isha azuva va'atzuvas ruach, like a forsaken woman and like a downtrodden woman, because the Jewish people were stuck. They violated the mitzvos. They turned aside from Hashem. Hashem said, if I wanted to, I could replace you because you broke the bond between us. Even though Hashem, of course, was not planning to replace the Jewish people and did not replace them, but he could have. So temporarily, it's as if they were forsaken and they couldn't go and be allowed to worship idols because they were still bound by their original oath. Next paragraph. Ve'al zeh siyem ve'omar. And based on this idea, the pasuk concludes with the words "Ve'eshis neurim ki simo es," and the Jewish people were like a woman that someone had married in his youth, that later on became despised. Ki min adin, because according to the law, im hayish shomeres hashvua, if the Jewish people had kept their oath, if they hadn't violated their bond, their commitment to Hashem, lo hayuli limos bach. Hashem says, I would not be allowed to despise you, to feel these feelings of that you've done something despicable. Avalim kol zeh. But even with all that the Jewish people did, lo hinachti osach, I did not forsake you, vehechlaftich be'um acheres, and I didn't replace you with a different people. She'oz hayis petura af ad mishvuasech. Had I done that, you would have been exempt from your commitment, from your oath. Shela'acher shanis lezeh shekenegdo, because after the individual who kept the oath to marry someone else, then even the person who didn't show up is permitted to marry someone else. I only forsook you for a brief moment, and immediately with great mercy I brought you back. So Hashem is saying to the Jewish people, you have no excuse, because yes, it's true, you can point to the fact that I might have become angry with you because of sins, especially because of avodah zarah. But even then, it was only berega katon azavtich, right from the pasuk in Yeshaya. I only forsook you for a brief moment and only became angry with you very briefly. But immediately, my mercy and my compassion came back to bring you back. Next paragraph. V'loma kodesh baruch hu lo hechalifam. Why didn't Hashem replace the Jewish people? Mipnei she'adin no saying, because this is what this was Hashem following what the law said. Going back to the Shulchan Aruch. She'im ha'isha dahainu hama'akev, because if the woman who in our scenario didn't show up for the wedding, yavi edim da'anus, who if she had brought witnesses that she was prevented from showing up because of some unpreventable emergency, then it turns out that it would not be permissible for the other person to violate the oath and the arrangement. top of the next column, Va'al zeh, and this is what the pasuk is referring to when it says, B'shetzef ketzef histarti ponai rega mimech. In a very brief moment, I became angry and hid my face from you. Klomar, this means to say, rak rega levad, only very temporarily, umiyad, and immediately, bechesed olam richamtich, with an eternal kindness, I showed compassion. V'koshe, and there's a question on this pasuk, lama amar bechesed olam. Why did it use these specific words with an eternal kindness? The ode, and also Masei shvuos hamabul. Why did the psukim bring in a reference to Noach and the flood? Ki me Noach zosli, and Hashem is quoted as saying, "This is like the waters of Noach and the oath that I took regarding the flood." Why did the Navi bring that in and quote Hashem to refer to that? Next paragraph, the last paragraph. And we can say, Parshas Noach, if we look back into the section dealing with the story of Noach and the Mabul in the flood, Ksiv, it's written, Ki yetzer leiv ha'odom ra min ne'urav. The inclination of the heart of a person is evil from his youth. Ubishvil zeh, and because of this, Kedei shelo lahachariv ha'olam kama pa'amim, in order that Hashem would not feel the need to destroy the world over and over again, Nishpa HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem took an oath, shelo yavi od mabul, that he would not bring another flood, Ya'an b'nei Adam anusim heimi yitzram, because he understood that human beings are forced to violate his will based on their very powerful Yetzer Hara, their evil inclination. The ihu de nura ve'anan de bisra. This is a quote, an Aramaic quote, of course, as you can see from the words from the Gemara in Kiddushin. It, meaning the Yetzer Hara, de nura, is a flame. Ve'anan de bisra, and we human beings, we're made of flesh. We can't fight against a flame, a fire will burn us, a fire can destroy us. And that's the power of the Yetzer Hara. So when it comes to the Yetzer Hara, we are anusim. It's like a force that we can't withstand. Ve'af kan yomru Yisrael. And so too here, this is what the Jewish people can say. Anusim hayinu b'yitzreinu. We were compelled by our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, to violate your words, Hashem. We wanted to keep your mitzvos. We never would have wanted to willfully worship idols, but our Yetzer Hara got the best of us. Umashe ikavnu eno klum, the fact that we caused problems in the relationship and threatened and seem to violate our commitments, that shouldn't count against us. And you're not allowed to replace us. And this is what the pasuk means, b'chesed olam richamtich, with an eternal kindness I showed compassion to you. Kishem shekiyamti ha'olam v'tanas ones tiyetzer. The same way I made sure the world would continue to exist because of the claim of onus from the Yetzer Hara, ki me Noach zos li. That was the reason why I took said the words that I wouldn't bring back a flood to destroy the world like I did in the time of Noach. Kein nishpati miketzef alayach umigar bach. So too I have forsworn not to show terrible anger and rebuke to you, Ya'an anusa at v'yitzrech, because I know that you are sometimes compelled through your Yetzer Hara to violate my mitzvos. So the Zera Shimshon here took us into the Haftorah on Parshas Masei, again, double Parsha Matos Masei, took us into the Haftorah, and gave us a very deep and fascinating explanation to psukim from the Haftorah, and then tied it in with psukim from an entirely different place in Navi, from Sefer Yeshaya or Sefer Yeshayo, which, by the way, those psukim come from a different Haftorah, the Haftorah on Parshas Vayelech, but they tied in very nicely to our Haftorah and fit in perfectly with the themes that the Zera Shimshon developed for us here. Yasher Koch for joining in the learning on Parshas Masei. We look forward, God willing, next week to learn together on next week's Parsha.